In the international development space, the number one principle of implementing projects in that space is the principle of do no harm. Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Chinwe. I'm a project manager and I talk about everything project management, business analysis and innovation management. So on today's video we are going to be talking about international development project management. For some of you who have not yet seen my first video, I did mention that I started my career in the international development space as a project coordinator. I've got some useful tidbits for you, some useful information on all you need to succeed in your role as a project manager in the international development space. Now, before I go into it, I just want to make mention that in the international development space, the number one principle of implementing projects in that space is the principle of do no harm. Alright? Your projects cannot have an unintended negative impact. The beneficiaries of your project or the potential beneficiaries of your project will not care to know whether it was intended or unintended. Alright? So you have to keep that at the back of your mind. You cannot do any harm in the course of implementing your projects. So that's why projects in this space are quite complex, delicate, especially projects that involve children. By the name alone, international development, you should know that these are projects that are geared towards improving the livelihoods of people in developing countries or improving the quality of life for people in developing countries. Alright? So if in the course of wanting to do good, you then cause more harm, things like that are generally frowned upon in the international development space, and it's not just a bad look for your organization, but it's a bad look for other organizations implementing projects in such regions as well, because people would not be trusting, for future organizations or future projects because of the actions of one individual or one organization. I have put down a couple of notes. I want to make sure that I don't miss anything. The key areas of focus for international development projects. In some cases, it's the projects or programs geared towards poverty reduction or eradication. In some cases, health, education, nutrition. In some aspects, nutrition comes under health, but I think these days they're beginning to, be a standalone area of expertise, because health projects or health programs are quite broad. So I think at this point, nutrition projects, do tend to stand alone because they themselves are, a broad area. We also have infrastructure and environment. We have capacity building. We have entrepreneurship projects. We have sustainability projects. And I don't know if you have heard of WASH projects. So it's an acronym for water, sanitation and hygiene. Okay, so as a project manager in this space, sometimes when recruiters hire, they look at someone that has when they hire project managers, they look at someone that has a little bit of a background in these areas. Okay, maybe in your previous role. Okay, let me use as an example. When I got hired as a project coordinator for an entrepreneurship project, I had a background in, working with entrepreneurs, working with startup founders in a different part of the country, and that was, one of the things that led to my being hired for this role. I already had, not as a project manager, but as a hub manager and someone that also worked on an entrepreneurship grant as a monitoring officer. So I did have some experience in the entrepreneurship space, and that was how I was brought on as a project coordinator for that entrepreneurship program. For some people that work in infrastructure, they probably have a background in engineering, have a background in it's some kind of technical background, and they're brought in as project managers in environmental infrastructure. Okay, let's talk about money. I love money. It's one of my favorite topics. So some of you may be wondering, how are projects funded in the international development space? Because again, this is like a non-profit sector. So that means these projects are not generating money like your IT projects that are designed to be revenue generating projects. In the international development space, this is not so. Projects are funded primarily by donors. These are in some cases they could be wealthy individuals. In some other cases they could just be individuals like me and you going to one website or the website of one charity organization or the other, just to contribute our little quota to making the lives of people in the developing areas a lot better. So donations are collected from individuals wealthy and not, from organizations, from companies. For some organizations, they have their corporate social responsibility budget. So sometimes the budget for that feeds into the donations that come to developing countries, and that's how these projects are implemented. Okay, all right. So let's talk about the principles of project management in the international development space. If you saw my previous video, it's the same thing. It's the only difference is you're transferring. I wouldn't even call it a difference. It's more like an adaptation. So you're bringing in those principles of project management, the project management life cycle. You're bringing that into the international development space. So you see things like planning and organization. Yes, the same way you plan and organize a project in an IT project or a construction project or an event project is the same way. It's the same sort of foundation, for planning and organizing projects in the international development space. You're not just going to implement them haphazardly. There has to be a sequence of activities that would happen. Managing and resource effectiveness. Yes, it is even more critical in the development space to manage resources effectively. Remember, these are funds that are coming from people who gave of their own accord. You cannot squander this money. You cannot spend over budget. In some cases you can spend over budget, but it has to come with certain layers of approval, and it has to speak to the project outcomes. But there's a whole process for that. Okay, but you cannot spend it on things that were not agreed upon in the budget. Monitoring progress and mitigating risks. Yes, it also happens in fact, it happens. Risk management plan or approach in international development space is worthy of study. Yes, because you're going to really high risk locations. If you're implementing humanitarian projects, my peeps who are implementing humanitarian projects, they know what I'm talking about. You're going to really, really volatile regions. So I don't need to even talk about the risks that happen in those areas. So your risk management plan has to be top notch. Okay, you also have to make sure that the projects deliver the intended outcomes. For example, remember I mentioned the principle of do no harm. If you're implementing a project that is designed to improve the capacity of women in rural areas, helping them to increase their income, maybe the objective of the goal of the project is to help these women improve their income by 20%. Now you go and you implement the project and they're losing what they had by even 1%. There's a problem. The project you've not delivered that project. There's a very big problem. And that problem doesn't just impact you, it impacts any other organization that might want to come into that location to implement a similar project. Oh yes. So you have to make sure that your projects deliver the intended outcomes. So what is the role of the project manager here? It's pretty easy. It's planning and designing. You have to work with the donors, the stakeholders within your organization to plan and design how that project will be implemented. Responsible again, like I said, for resource allocation. So you've broken down the tasks, who is doing what, how much would it cost, okay, how much would it take us to go from point A to point B. You're doing all that. That's your leadership and recruitment. Oh yeah, you're primarily responsible for recruitment. I remember having to, one of the projects that I implemented, it was an entrepreneurship project. What I told the hiring manager is, I'm not really that big on masters, because it was in the job description, and I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to pay that much attention. Yeah, they could have a master's, that's a plus, but I'm looking for people who have real life experiences as an entrepreneur or have supported an entrepreneur in one capacity or the other. It could be their mom. They could have owned a small mom and pop shop somewhere in the corner of the street for all I cared. They could have sold clothes in school for all I cared, as long as they had that first-hand experience or have supported someone who has that experience. That also gives them the experience, but at least they know what they have, first-hand knowledge of what the challenges are. So that's what, you know, that was one of the specifications that I put into the team, well, into the job description for the team that I eventually hired, and that was one of the most fabulous teams that I've ever worked with. So you're also responsible for stakeholder engagement. Yes, stakeholders could be internal, they could be external. It could be the government, they could be the local community chiefs, they could be the head of the institutions, organizations you're going to be partnering with, the vendors, whatever. You are the person to, you know, be consulted. Yes, for anything that has to do with the management of stakeholders. So your primary role is to make sure everybody's happy, and that's not one of the easiest things to do, especially when everybody has conflicting expectations or certain conflicting objectives for their respective organizations. Yes, it happens. So your job is to make sure that everyone's expectations are aligned. Everyone has the results that will make them or their organizations happy. Monitoring and evaluation. On most projects, you will have a monitoring and evaluation officer or manager. This is the person that helps you identify and structure your key performance indicators and comes up with ways of measuring and tracking those key performance indicators. But you are the project owner, you understand the brief, you know what the donor, the stakeholders want, so your primary role is ensuring that you're able to monitor and control the project effectively in such a way that the objectives of the project is met and the expectations of your stakeholders are also met, and everyone has their expected results. Okay, and then we have financial management. Yeah, as of course you have an accountant, but you're managing the budget. You are the one saying this is what this is the cost that will be allocated to this task, or this is the cost that will be allocated to this activity. So it is your responsibility to ensure that you don't overspend or underspend, because in some cases underspending could be a bad thing because it says, oh, you didn't plan accordingly. And then of course risk management, which we talked about earlier in the video. Okay, let's talk about challenges of international development projects. Yes, number one is cultural differences. Oh my goodness, because you're going to an area that is not developed, you have to be careful about the things, the norms, the values, the beliefs that they hold dear. Oh yes, the beliefs that they hold dear. You might be going to a region that is, let me give you an example that I believe is applicable worldwide. If you're going to a developing country and you're going to a specific region that is populated by Muslims, and you're implementing a nutrition focused project, and the case study or the vehicle for promoting that nutrition is pork based products, you failed even before you started. Google it, I don't need to explain why. Okay, so those are like certain things you have to keep in mind. You have to understand the local customs, you have to be able to build trust and rapport with the local communities, and then you have to adapt your projects to fit those local customs. There's a project that I implemented in the northern part of Nigeria, that there are some persons and there are some regions that don't necessarily engage with the opposite sex as effectively, or as they would with someone who's of the same gender or sex with them. So in that case, even though I was the project lead, I didn't go. I sent a staff member who is male to represent me. But at some point, when, of course, the leader is the leader, when he saw that the person needed to get several approvals from me, instead of oh, I'm going to speak with my project manager and get back to you, eventually they found that it was easier to just come straight to me, talk to me, or for them to but yeah, persons believe that in some regions they believe that women should not discuss businesses. Nothing against them, it's their belief. You just have to find a way to work around that belief system to ensure that you achieve your project objective. Okay. Another challenge is political instability. If people who have implemented humanitarian projects attest to this, so you have to keep this at the back of your mind. The areas you're going to may be a volatile region, so your risk management approach has to speak to this, has to capture this challenge. Economic disparities, managing resources and constraints and budget limitation is always a problem. Budget management. There are some areas you come up with a budget that cuts across like several regions, and you find out that one region you've used a particular rate for one region, and then you're going to the other region and you're finding out that things actually cost more here. So for example, you're implementing a project in a national project, right? What you'll find is you would actually think that things might be cheaper in the rural areas, but shockingly you find that some rural areas are even more expensive than some urban areas. Yes, I had that experience. It was insane. So you have to keep that at the back of your mind, and there will also be other things that would want to take up part of your budget that were not anticipated, especially within the organization. They're critical overall to achieving the organization's objective, but not necessarily project critical. I'll talk more on that in future videos, but yes, you have to watch out for things like that in your project. Of course, language barriers. Yes, in Nigeria alone, over 250 languages are spoken, so you have to make sure that you account for that difference across the regions, the ethnic groups, and ensure that you've budgeted for a translator for your materials across these regions. If you're implementing a project in Africa, it's a continent-wide project, I can't tell you how much needs to be, how much resource needs to be dedicated to translating documents into different major languages across the continent. So those are things that, and not just about translation, but in terms of how communication is done. Certain things might be taken out of context because of the technicalities of language. So you need to understand what words are used in specific context and what words are not used in specific contexts. And let's talk about the importance of effective project management. So to ensure project success, you need to make sure that your projects are always delivered on time, all right, and within budget. You also need to ensure that you're prioritizing the delivery of high quality projects. Remember what we talked about? It's not just about you, it's not just about your organization, but the entire ecosystem could be impacted if a project does not deliver high quality outcomes. You also need to maximize the impact of your project. Yes, if your project has made positive impact, talk about it. Let that feed into new projects that would be implemented. Yes, share your success stories, document your case studies. Yes, these are things that will not just help your organization but also help you in maybe you might move on to another organization or move on to another project within that organization. And finally, build strong partnerships. Yes, you see that guy that comes to tell you that the chief is ready to see you now, or not ready to see you. You want to make sure you have a good relationship with that guy. Yes, as low as that. You also want to make, of course, you have to have a good relationship with community leads, association heads. You want to have a good relationship with the government. You want to have a good relationship with heads of service. You want to have a good relationship with your vendors, your private sector partners. Most important thing in this sector, relationship is key and paramount. All right, so if you stayed with me till now, thank you so much for visiting my YouTube channel and listening to this video. Please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this.